Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tyler Hour. So I just saw The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes last weekend, and I thought this would be a great time to rank all of the Hunger Games movies. I would consider myself an above average fan of Hunger Games. I'm not a die-hard fan. I've never read the books, but I think it has a really good concept, and I just feel like it never reached its full potential. I don't know what that potential is. I can't really explain it, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But let's move on to the ranking. I'm going to talk about some spoilers with some of these movies, but I will give a spoiler warning when I talk about Songbirds and Snakes for those who haven't seen it yet. For the other movies, I feel like it's been long enough now where I don't know if people are going to care about spoilers that much, but just warning you all now. Before moving on to the rankings, I want to give an honorable mention to the second quarter Quell fan film that was made by the YouTube channel Mainstay Pro. I know most diehard Hunger Games fans have probably seen this fan film before, but I just wanted to give it a shout out because for its time, it really was a good fan film. I remember watching it in middle school when like the Hunger Games fandom was at its peak. I just watched it again before making this video, and it still holds up. It follows a young Haymitch and shows what his games were like. The games that he played in was the second quarter Quell, and you get to see how he won those games. So if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description to it and probably here too. Because I think if you're a fan of the Hunger Games, you should see it. It may be the only on-screen adaptation of Haymitch's time in the Hunger Games that we'll ever get. But without further ado, let's move into the rankings. So starting with number 5. So at number 5, I have Mockingjay Part 2. Now, I know a lot of people put Mockingjay Part 1 at the bottom, but I'm putting Mockingjay Part 2 at the bottom because it is so boring. It is the only Hunger Games movie that I never got to see in theaters, and honestly, I'm not even really sad about it because the Hunger Games fandom was dead by the time this movie came out. No one seemed to really care about this movie except like the true diehard Hunger Games fans. But I gotta tell you, this is one of the most anticlimactic endings to a series I've ever seen. It is so painfully dull and boring. Like, for every moment in the movie, they execute it in the most anticlimactic way possible, except for one sequence in the movie, and that's when they're in like the tunnels and they're like fighting those creatures and trying to like escape them. That was the only like exciting part of the movie for me. But even then, it ended up leading to the death of my favorite character in the movie, Finnick. So by the end of that sequence, it left a bitter taste in my mouth because I was like, oh, fuck. Well, now they just killed the most interesting character in this movie. And there was still a lot more movie left after that. Part two's ending reminds me a lot of the Game of Thrones ending. It's just a lot of conversations happening and they aren't even interesting. They are so boring to watch. Because you can have a movie that's like mostly conversation, like Oppenheimer, for example, and it can be interesting. I freaking love Oppenheimer. But this movie, the conversations and the dialogue scenes are very dull, and I didn't care by the end of the movie. Another thing that was like stupid was Prim's death in this movie. It just came out of nowhere, and Prim is such a non-character in these movies that I just did not give a fuck when she got blown up. I was just like,
I mean, like, I'm supposed to be upset by that?
whatever, move on. Moving on now. I know like technically more things happen in this movie compared to part 1, but this movie is way more disappointing than part 1, and I'll get to that. I'll get to part 1 when I talk about it on these rankings. By the end of the movie, I didn't even really care about Katniss or Peeta or Gale. Like, you see Katniss end up with Peeta and she has a child, and I'm just like, whatever. Like, I don't care. I just really, it's shocking to me how much I didn't care about these characters. by the end of the movie. So that's why Mockingjay Part 2 is in last place. At number 4, I have Mockingjay Part 1. I think this was no surprise. These last two movies were such a step down from the rest of the movies in the franchise. So I feel like there's not much I need to say about this one. I feel like this movie gets ignored a lot for being a part 1 to a story. It's not very climactic, but at the very least it felt like it was building up to something great. Like, I did see this movie in the theaters when it came out, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time watching it. It wasn't as great as the previous two films, but it felt like a slow burn that was leading up to a climactic finale. And it made me excited to watch the next movie. And I was like, oh man, I can't wait for part 2. That's where stuff is really going to go down. And then part 2 came out and it was just a snooze fest. So I think this movie, part 1, hurts less to watch because you could see the potential for the story to get even better there. You could see the potential for greatness. You know, I liked the scene when they go and rescue PETA from the Capitol. I thought that was an intense scene. Also, this movie had Penguin Zero, aka Moist Critical, involved in the production.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for.
So that immediately gives it a leg up against part 2. Overall, this movie left a good taste in my mouth, and it made me excited to watch part 2. And then we all know how that turned out. At number 3, I have The Hunger Games, the original movie. This movie was a great introduction to Pan Am. It had one of the best hooks out of any story. Like, a bunch of kids get handpicked to fight to the death in this thing called the Hunger Games, and it's all for the entertainment of elites. I mean, like, that right there shows potential for a great story. It got so many people on board to watch. I remember when this movie came out, I was in middle school, and I loved it when I first watched it. I just really loved this story, and this movie got me on board to the franchise. I loved how this movie explored how the games are a form of entertainment for the people in the Capitol. It really makes the story more dark because, you know, these are kids' lives at stake. These kids are killing each other, and yet these people sit back and watch and are entertained by it. It's just so disturbing, but it really makes this world interesting. There's so many great characters in this movie. You know, Katniss is a really great hero that anyone can get behind. She's really someone you want to see survive these games. Like, you're rooting for her throughout the whole movie. PETA was also someone that was very easy to like. Like, he seems like such a sweet guy. And you just feel bad for him that he's in this situation. And, you know, obviously he has a crush on Katniss, and now he has to go into these games with her and potentially, like, have to kill her. You know, like, you don't want to see that happen. You don't want to see these two characters have to fight each other. And Haymitch, played brilliantly by Woody Harrelson, may just be the best character in the whole series. I really loved him in this movie. I think this might be his, like, best movie. He has just so many great moments, and you can tell that, like, being a past winner of the games has really taken a toll on him, and it has affected his life. When you meet him in this movie, he's just become an alcoholic, and you can see, like, his life is really in shambles. But as you start to learn more about him, his character starts to become more complex. And personally, I really got invested with him. I will say this movie falters with the way that the action is filmed. This is probably my biggest negative with the movie. The way the action is filmed sucks. It's terrible. There's way too much shaky cam. You can't tell what's going on. It really hurts this movie. The editing isn't good at parts. I mean, just look at the opening ceremony scene with the chariots. There are so many cuts in that scene. There are way too many cuts. It's disorienting. Like, imagine watching this in the theater. I know I did watch this movie in the theater, but I don't really remember it. So I don't remember if this scene was disorienting to me in the theater, but I can just imagine it being because there's so many quick cuts for really no reason. So yeah, those two things, the shaky cam and the poor editing, really hurt this film for me. But as a story, the writing is great. It's a good movie to watch. It's a great introduction to the series, and I could see myself rewatching this movie time and time again because at the end of the day, I do enjoy it. Now, here we go. This is it. We have two movies left, and as soon as I reveal number 2, that automatically reveals number 1. This may be a hot take, but at number 2, I have Catching Fire. I know. I know. Now I know what this means for number 1. Hold off typing in the comments. We'll get to that. We'll get to Songbirds and Snakes. But for now, I want to talk about Catching Fire. Now, this film is where Francis Lawrence took over as director, and he has directed every Hunger Games movie since then. And you can really see the difference in the look of this film compared to the first one. The cinematography is way better. You can see what's going on in the action. The action is filmed way better. There's no crazy shaky cam anymore. You can actually see what's going on. This movie has the best action of the whole series. The editing is way better too. I mean, just compare the chariot scene in this movie to the chariot scene in the first movie. There is way less disorienting cuts. There's way less cuts in general, but it's not disorienting. It's not crazy. It's filmed and edited exactly how it should be. The games are way cooler in this movie. The setting is cooler. I love how they have to start the game by swimming to the cornucopia. I like the wetsuits that they get. I think they're sick. And I love that they fill up these games with past Hunger Games winners for the third quarter Quell. It's like it's an all-star game. And that just really heightens the tension because now Katniss and Peeta are not facing up against amateurs anymore. Everyone in this game is someone who has won the Hunger Games before. So they're going up against killers, and it's going to be way harder than the previous games. This movie also introduces us to more great characters such as Plutarch, Joanna Mason, Beatty, and the awesome Finnick Odair. I fucking love Finnick in this movie. He is one of the best characters. I think he's only second to Haymitch for me. But I will say in like the last movie, like Mockingjay Part 2, he was the best character in that movie. But I freaking love my boy Finnick. He is so cool in this movie. He's got the charm. He's got the skill with his staff. He's just all around a cool dude, and I freaking love him. Joanna Mason is another one of my favorites too. Like, she is really awesome. This is her best movie, and I wish they did more with her after this movie, but she at least gets to shine here. This movie also has one hell of a finale with the collapsing of the dome in the games where Katniss shoots the arrow in time with the lightning and just takes down everything. I just thought it was so cool. This movie had probably the most climactic ending in the franchise, and it's so sick. And it leaves you with a great cliffhanger that leaves you dying to see the next movie. You know, Katniss gets saved, and Gale tells her that District 12 has basically been destroyed, and you just see the look on her face. She is ready to go after Snow, and it really just, it gets you excited for the next movie, and it's quite unfortunate that the next two movies were not that great, but at least we have this good cliffhanger, you know. All right, so now let's talk about number 1. Like I said, again, this may be a hot take, and this may be recency bias. I don't know. I haven't rewatched any of the other Hunger Games movies in a long time, so maybe I'm just not remembering them as well, but as of right now, I think The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is my favorite Hunger Games movie. I am surprised I liked this movie as much as I did. I really didn't have very high expectations for this movie going in. I didn't really hear about the book when it came out, and then all of a sudden I hear that they're making this movie based on the book. And I'm like, okay, another Hunger Games movie. It's following a young Coriolanus Snow. Okay, I'll check it out. It could be good. And boy, was I surprised because I ended up loving this movie. I think this is the best looking movie in the franchise by far. It has the best cinematography out of all the movies. And it really feels like this movie had the most care put into it out of the entire franchise. I like that this movie is long. It's 2.5 hours, and you do feel the length a bit, especially when you're watching it in a theater. But I really liked that it took its time to tell this story. It's divided into 3 parts, and it seems like this could have been made into a trilogy of movies, but I am so glad that they didn't. I'm so glad they just kept this contained to one movie, because you just get a complete story in one movie and you don't have to wait for another. I think that maybe that's why I love this movie the best. It's the only movie that has a complete story in it. I loved seeing this very early version of the Hunger Games where they didn't really know how to market it and get people to watch. And so they're experimenting with ways on making the Hunger Games more marketable and making the tributes seem like people that the people of the capital want to root for and see win. And I loved seeing how Snow was coming up with these ideas to making the tributes seem like real people instead of just, lambs to the slaughter. And this was the first Hunger Games where they had a host, and I loved the host in this movie. Lucky Flickerman was the funniest character in this movie. He was great to watch. Now, the games themselves in this movie were exciting. The sequence after the countdown where Lucy Gray is making her way through the initial carnage that is happening is very exciting, and it's shot very well. I think that sequence was a highlight of this movie. The performances in this movie were great. We got the amazing Peter Dinklage playing the man who created the Hunger Games. I found his character to be very interesting in this movie. We got Viola Davis, who at first was a little kooky. I wasn't sure if I was into her at first, but by the end of the movie, she became very sinister, and I really liked her by the end. I mentioned Lucky Flickerman before, who is brilliantly played by Jason Schwartzman. I feel like this was a perfect role for him. I thought Rachel Zegler did a really good job in this movie. I know, outside of the movie space, I know a lot of people don't like her. But in this movie, I thought she did a great job. And she is a very talented singer. The scenes where she sings in this movie are really good. But by far, the best performance of this movie is Tom Blythe playing the man himself, Coriolanus Snow. Snow is a very complex character in this movie, and that is not an easy task for an actor to portray well. But he does a perfect job. And speaking of Snow, I really liked seeing how he became the villain that we know him to be in the main trilogy. Now, my one big negative with Songbirds and Snakes has to do with spoilers, so I'm going to issue a spoiler warning here now. If you haven't seen the movie and you don't want it to get spoiled for you, then just go to the time code I have here below. Now, my one big negative is I did not like how ambiguous the final scene with Lucy Gray is. I know that this is more of an issue with the book because this is how the book portrays it. It's not really the movie's fault. But it just left me confused with so many questions. Why did Lucy sound so suspicious in the cabin? Why did she just disappear? Did she not trust Snow? When he said that he's killed 3 people and she was like, well, who's the third? I know he slipped up because he was talking about his friend Sejanus. But, was that enough to really, cause her to turn on Snow? Is that what she was doing? Was she betraying Snow? That part I just didn't really get. Why was she so suspicious? Why did she leave the cabin and then just disappear? And where did she go? Where is Lucy Gray? Is she dead? Is she alive? Did she go back to District 12? Probably not. Was Snow going to kill her initially? When I was watching the movie, I thought Snow's plan was that he wasn't actually going to run away with Lucy. He was going to take her out to the woods. He was going to pretend like he's going to run away with her, and then he was going to kill her, and then bring her back to District 12 to the mayor and be like, I found the person who murdered your daughter. Here you go. And I thought he was going to do all that for his own personal gain. But it seems like he was going to run away with Lucy. Now, I'm not against ambiguous endings in general. I think ambiguous endings work very well in other movies. I just think for a movie like this, I prefer to have answers. They don't necessarily need to be like definitive answers, but I want the answers to at least be implied. Like, at least imply that Lucy Gray is dead, or imply that she is off somewhere, like, seeking refuge, or I don't know, whatever. If someone has an answer in the comments, please tell me. But as far as I know, it's meant to be ambiguous, and you're not supposed to know exactly what happened to Lucy Gray. But other than that, I really loved this movie, and I do think it's the best Hunger Games movie in the franchise. So that is my ranking for every Hunger Games movie. Do you agree with my rankings? I know a lot of people probably won't. Let me know in the comments how you would rank the Hunger Games movies, because I am interested to see how other people would rank them. But that's going to be it for this video. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe and like this video. It really helps me out with the algorithm. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.